Alright, good day everyone, and welcome to a quick guide for Terra Invicta. I figured now the game has gone into early access, I should release a couple of early game guides to help people out, and then don't worry, in a couple of days from now, I'll be resuming uploads on my playthrough as Humanity First. And I thought there are a couple of topics that I could cover. One that's definitely on my radar is, for example, helping people navigate the incredibly complex tech tree of Terra Invicta. Another might be early space expansion or how to manage economies. There's a lot of topics I could go through. But I thought today I'd cover the first topic there is, the first decision you make when you open a game of Terra Invicta. Most of well, apart from possibly recruiting another councillor, and I might talk about how do you select councillors and select orgs at a later date. But the first thing you do in Terra Invicta really is you make a decision over where you want to try and set up shop. Most of your resources in Terra Invicta, well, they come from controlling nations. They come from extracting resources from the world's various nation states in order to provide you, say, research, boost, money, etc. But this is sort of a hard decision for two reasons. The first is from the moment you start the game, in the first frenzied week, all the human factions in the game, depending on how many you've set up for there to be, they're all going to be scrambling for influence too. So you find yourself in a pretty cutthroat competition against some increasingly competent AI that have gotten better with each iteration of the game from a pretty early stage. The second problem you run into is a control point cap. Every country in Terra Invicta which is controlled by control points, has an upkeep cost associated with each of its CPs. That cost is equal to the number of investment points, which is derived from the size of that country's economy, and that's paid for each control point a nation has. The more powerful a nation, the more CPs it has. So this means that while intuitively you might think, oh, I just need to control the biggest, strongest nations on the planet, they may not necessarily be the best decision because sometimes a nation which has a very high CP upkeep might not necessarily provide you as many resources relative to your limited cap as another nation. So resources and picking them is a bit of a complex task at times, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today. All right, so Perun, get to it. What sort of countries am I interested in? Well, I'm going to talk about interesting countries, not every planet on planet Earth, but what I'm going to try and do is talk you through the strengths, weaknesses, and options around a number of interesting countries. And I'm going to cover them in three categories. I'm going to talk about the superpowers, I'm going to talk about interesting middle ranking major powers, and I'm going to talk about interesting small countries and classes of small countries. So when I say superpowers, I mean countries that you can build an entire playthrough around, countries that take up almost your entire control point cap, which are characterized by being large, powerful, having huge advantages, but being very expensive to maintain, and also very difficult to take over at game start. And there are exactly two as I would classify them: the United States of America and the People's Republic of China. Let's talk about each of them in turn. The USA is probably the number one choice for a number of players at the moment. It's the one I've gone with in my Humanity First playthrough. It is the world's preponderant superpower at game start, and it's basically the balanced choice which gives you a lot of options so far as superpowers go. It has 6 CPs, each one costs 27.23, which means you can just about fit it into your cap once you hire another councillor. You should comfortably be able to hold all 6 American CPs. It's got a GDP of 22 billion, which means it's quite difficult to take over. So the best approach for taking the United States is usually to open the game by going straight for Canada and Mexico, because if you have control points in nations that physically neighbor your target state, you get a bonus to influence rolls against it. The United States also does have a high knowledge and high democracy value, relatively speaking. There are a lot of councillor traits that give advantages in those environments. So if you're lucky enough to roll one of those councils or be able to recruit one, then they might be especially suited for taking the United States. What does the US give you? What are its key advantages? Well, the first advantage the US has is that you can run an entire early game off it because it has a little bit of everything. It has the single largest science output in the game. at game start. 418 base science is spectacular. If we compare that to, for example, the Chinese start with 328. So you get better science output for a cheaper country, because China costs more to hold, with the United States than with China. Its boost income is, again, the second best in the world. Only Kazakhstan has a higher boost output at game start. A lot of people complain about this because they talk about SpaceX. Private rocket firms are modeled as organizations in the game, so hence this value. The other point is the US has very high mission control. So 6 mission control is serviceable for an early space program. The US has 28 nukes. This is another distinguishing feature. There are 2 nations in the game with far more nukes than anyone else, the United States and Russia. Holding the United States not just only gives you the advantage of those 28 nukes, it prevents anyone else getting their hands on them. And the final advantage, the big advantage, I think, the biggest single advantage of the United States is the United States military. The US starts with a Navy score of 27, which means if it is at war with any other country on the planet, that country cannot move troops over water. While the United States itself starts with the largest number of troops of anyone in the game, 6, and I think they start with 6 armies, one of which starts in Korea. They start with the highest military tech level, 4.5, and they start with navies attached to all their militaries. What this means is the United States can be your giant military beatstick. If you take the USA, any non-nuclear alliance or country that you can beat up is vulnerable to you, because you can roll all 6 armies by ocean anywhere in the world, land on people's capitals. A lot of capitals are coastal. Take them over, throw them out, regime change, operation whatever freedom. There is an achievement for it, I believe. The US does have some problems, though, that you need to fix. So if you do take a US strategy, you have to solve 3 problems. The first is it starts polarized and trending downwards. This increases unrest and makes life difficult. This means that you want to bring the US towards a more central cohesion value. Early on, this might mean unity, but it also means reducing inequality, the US's second problem. It desperately needs some investment in welfare in order to bring inequality down, and it starts with a relatively high unrest level and a pretty good, but by no means perfect, democracy value. So in terms of fixing the United States, it's about unity, but then mostly about knowledge and welfare until you get inequality into sort of an acceptable range, and this trending towards 5. At that point, you can basically do whatever you want with the United States. My personal preference is to use it as a giant military beatstick, so invest heavily in military technology to leverage those existing armies that you have. And if you're taking the US, then you're probably relying on military force for a playthrough. One note, you can increase cohesion by declaring war on people. So you are actively encouraged as the US to go use that giant military to go invade people, because it helps keep your public together as long as you're declaring lots of wars, winning them all quickly and cheaply. The United States sort of compatriot in the superpower category is China. China is even harder to take over than the United States. It has a higher GDP because the purchasing power parity GDP is used in Terra Invicta's calculations. So taking over China is a real effort. However, it has many more bordering nations. You can so a China grab strategy involves getting North Korea, Mongolia, probably Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Pakistan. You can probably go into Myanmar. Like, you can just take all these surrounding nations to put more and more pressure on China. And then once you want to grab all of the Chinese CPs at one time, because you're already going to be at your CP limit taking all the surrounding nations, you zoom into China and then you quickly abandon all the surrounding nations. That would be how I would recommend doing it at the right time. What does China have going for it compared to the US? Because it is more expensive, because it has more development points, but that is also its main strength. China has considerably more investment points than the United States. These are the points that you actually spend on improving the economy or welfare or knowledge, etc. So whatever you choose to do, China can get it done faster than the US does. So if you choose to dump all of this into economy, the Chinese economy can go to space. If you choose to dump it all into knowledge, then you can start to democratize China relatively quickly and improve the science output. If you decide you're going to produce boost and mission control, well, China at a 100% mission control commitment produces 1 MC point per month. It has a decent number of armies, an okay fleet. It starts with 2 armies that have navies. It can probably, well, it has the economic power to produce them for others. It could support armies if more armies if necessary. So in terms of that's the strategy for taking China. Fixing China is probably a matter for most people of knowledge, 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 knowledge. Increasing the science output, maybe dumping some into economy once you've got some bonuses, leveraging this up. You can turn China into an incredible powerhouse. It'll just take a while. The United States starts with a lot of this all already in place. It starts with more boost, more MC, more science, more military. China can overtake the US in anything it chooses to overtake them in. It just has to spend the time to do it. It's got the resources there, but I still think it's a perfectly valid opener for any particular playthrough. The US and China are both perfectly acceptable superpower starts. Now, what if you want to do major power starts? And this is, oh, sorry, there is a third superpower. Third superpower. Can you guess who it is? Can you guess who the third superpower is? It's France. All right, so look, by itself, France is not exactly a superpower. It costs a little less than half of what the US does in order to upkeep, and yet it doesn't really deliver anything like the same overall value, it seems. It's got one good quality division with a navy. The United States has 6. It has 3 nuclear weapons. The United States has 27. It has 86 science output. The US has 400. It does have reasonable boost, and it has a tiny bit of mission control. So you're like, Perun, what are you going on about? The reason France counts as a superpower is because it can serve as the basis for an opening, and that's because in the world of Terra Invicta, Macron, not Scholz, is the leader of the EU. All countries in the European Union can eventually be federated together. It used to be really easy and really quick. Now it's just a little bit slower, but France is the country with the power to do it. So the faction that controls France is the one that has the option to start federating together the EU. This strategy is a little finicky, it's a little annoying, it's a little up in the air because the AI tends to contest it these days. But when executed properly, exploiting the right combination of completing priorities at the right time before annexing countries or building specific investments, then annexing them and steadily grinding through, with a little bit of luck and the right councillors, it produces a fairly large united European Union in the first couple of years of the game. And in my view, it results in a superpower that has a lot of the best features of both China and the United States, with fewer of the weaknesses. Done properly, a united EU is probably going to have about half as many armies with navies as the United States. It's going to have considerably fewer nukes. That's okay. It'll have a much larger population than the US, but a smaller one than China. It'll have the best research output of any single country in the game, probably once glued together, with any degree of competent leadership whatsoever. It's just a country with immense potential. And with later technologies, it can be further expanded. The European Union can gain additional members through research. The US, of course, can expand. It can eventually annex Mexico and Canada, for example. But Europe can expand pretty crazily beyond what you might think reasonably possible. A true mega nation Europe can become. So it's a genuine superpower option. It's easy to get started, it's slower and a little frustrating, but the ultimate potential of a combined EU still makes it a superpower and a viable candidate for a start. Then there's major powers. So major powers think of them as one step down in terms of cost. And the distinction I make here is a superpower is a country you build an entire opening game out of, and maybe after a while your CP expands and you add partial control or full control of a major power. Major powers are probably opening the game by grabbing 2 of them rather than just one. They have many fewer outright sort of mega strengths. They don't have massively overpowering strengths, but they tend to have unique advantages. So rather than just being good at everything like the US, they tend to have something special about them. Russia, for example, has something special about it. In terms of what it offers in terms of resource income for what it costs, it's not a fantastic deal. It costs about, I think, 60 points in order to hold Russia at the start of the game, which, to be fair, is only about costs less than half of what the United States does. But you get nowhere near as much money or research. The Russian Federation, as it begins the game, has relatively high levels of unrest. And look, the economy is okay, but not great. What Russia has, and it's well behind on military tech level, what Russia has going for it is this giant pile of nuclear weapons, like the biggest pile of nuclear weapons in the game. So holding Russia gives you instantly control of a significant part of the arsenal. It's why so many strategies involve either holding on to Russia or taking the Russian executive point and then steadily disarming this nuclear arsenal. For my part, my playthroughs typically involve, well, my current playthrough involves grabbing the US and then partial and then eventually full control of Russia. So it's not great for research. It's not great for producing new cash. What it is great for is nuclear weapons and the fact that it runs the Eurasian Union. The Eurasian Union includes the country of Kazakhstan, which we'll talk about separately. It has claims on a number of countries in Eastern Europe, so it's quite possible to expand Russia into something reasonably functional. It gives you a okay military that starts pretty heavily damaged and committed in Ukraine. But those armies might be useful. One of them has a navy, for the most part, and it has relatively good mission control. In terms of mission control per cost, Russia is about as efficient as the United States, which is a decent feature. Russia is a country which sort of lives in the legacy of the Soviet Union in Terra Invicta. They have this massive pile of old Soyuz rockets linked to the Baikonur Cosmodrome. They've got the Roscosmos Control Center, which gives them 3MC. They've got all these nukes left over. Preparing for a conflict, a World War III that everyone hoped would never come, except in Terra Invicta the aliens arrived, so it's kind of good that they stockpiled all that stuff. It's very useful. So Russia is a call out for a major power if what you're looking for is a bunch of nukes and potential expansion, and particularly if you're looking for boost, MC, control of Kazakhstan, etc. India is another interesting major power. India starts with 5 CPs, each of which only costs 20. So this thing costs 100. Again, this is more than half of what the United States does, but it gives you a reasonable amount of science, 2 MC. What you're lacking is boost. You've only got a small number of nukes, but you start with 3 armies, tech level 3.8, entirely serviceable, and a reasonable number of investment points, 14.4. But none of this by itself is particularly impressive. You compare it to China. China has twice as many investment points almost. It has more military power. It has far more boost. It has the same amount of mission control. You're like, geez, what does India have to offer for me? Even the funding amounts are much, much, much lower than they are in China. Well, what India has is potential. Because of the way priorities work in this game, and I will do a thing on priorities at some point. Countries with high populations and growing populations, and India has both. It has a population that is almost as large as China's and which tends to grow, coupled with a reasonable starting democracy value and a decent education level, means that it responds very, very, very well to investment. The general rule in this game is this. Very large nations are very efficient when it comes to using spending priorities that affect the entire country, the entire population. So if you invest in the economy, for example, you increase GDP per capita. Well, there's a lot of capita in India to increase. So you're going to get much more bang for your buck investing in the economy or knowledge in India, because knowledge increases those levels and that produces science in a manner which is tied to the size of the country. So India, with a full investment in the economy, can become extraordinarily wealthy extremely quickly. It's already a flawed democracy at 6.9. A little bit of investment can drive that into the stratosphere too, and India can produce extraordinary amounts of research, kind of like China can, but it can get to that point arguably a little bit easier and more cheaply. So India has immense potential. It is a canvas. You can turn it into a research hub. You can turn it into an economic engine. It's got a decent amount of armies. You can militarize India. You can produce more armies, give them navies, and use it as a quasi United States. It's just a great major power to tack onto any strategy. And 209 research, not bad. Another one I wanted to call out, Japan. Japan is very, very cheap to control by comparison, much cheaper than, say, India. It's 17, 34, 34 by 2, 68. 68 control points. So, once you get your next counselor, Japan is going to be less than half of your initial cap. So it's great to pair with another country. And what it gives you is research, MC, a little bit of boost, starts developed, doesn't have an army, but begins with some investment in building an army if you need it. And if you do build that army, you start with hidden investment in a navy. But if whatever strategy you embark on is short on research and you're just scrambling for options, Japan is a nice pickup to add some research. I could keep going, but the qualities of major powers is that they have to be reasonably affordable, so in that sort of Russia, India, Japan cost range, and offer you something cool. For example, you could pair Japan and India and make a perfectly viable start. Or you could start grabbing some countries with high populations and high potential in Southeast Asia and look at some of the great nation options there. But Japan and India, for example, makes a decent combo, I think. Then you have smaller and minor nations that are notable for various reasons. These fall into a couple of categories that are, let's just cover some interesting countries as an example for what you look for. Look for a country that has something unique or a lot of one particular thing for a very cheap cost. That's what makes a good minor nation. Kazakhstan. Most people who play this game by now know about Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is special because it has the highest boost income of any country in the game, despite being a relatively small country that is cheap to control. For 15 CP, you get more boost than the United States if you control Kazakhstan, and it's very possible to take Kazakhstan. The problem is taking Kazakhstan is not enough. It is by default in a Eurasian Union with Russia, which is an artificial construct of the game that exists just to give, well, in part to give, most of the boost income from Kazakhstan to Russia. So Russia can absorb Kazakhstan, which is an advantage for Russia. But if you're not going for Russia, you can take Kazakhstan, remove it from the Eurasian Union, and have a huge boost advantage. I think most strategies that want to expand into space quickly, which I think is most of the power gaming strategies, involve Kazakhstan in some way. Whether it's taking Russia and absorbing it, or whether it's just taking Kazakhstan and removing it from the Eurasian Union. Classic interesting minor power. North Korea. We need to talk about North Korea and Israel. North Korea is a panic button. It's cool, it's interesting because it has only 1 CP and basically no economy, which means no matter how much you try, this control point here is always going to be easy to take. Because difficulty for roles is partly based on the size of a nation's economy, even with defend interest, a quality counselor is going to always be able to purge the CP in North Korea, plus the economy is tiny, and there is no core economic region here. So what do you do with North Korea? It's not about using this shitty Tech 2.8 army and its T-34s. Here's what happens. A situation emerges in the game where you need to nuke something. You need to nuke it. Maybe it has nuclear weapons itself. And you're in a panic. Because if you nuke a country with, say, let's just say you're playing the US and you need to nuke China for some reason. Like the worst has happened. But if you nuke China, China's going to nuke the United States, destroy one of these super valuable US armies, maybe hit a core economic region, send a shock through global GDP. It'll be really, really bad. So instead, you send a counselor and you quickly grab North Korea and you launch a nuke from North Korea at whatever you need destroyed. Whether that be servants or potentially spoilerish targets that you might want to shoot a nuke at, North Korea is your guy. Because if North Korea gets glassed, the impact on the global economy is basically zero. And you can always grab it in a pinch. So North Korea and its 1 nuclear weapon, fantastic little panic button. Similarly, over here, a little more rounded, a little more expensive. Israel, you need to dig in. Israel, again, costs about as much as Kazakhstan, so about 15 CP. Basically nothing. Very cheap to maintain a hold over Israel. But what Israel gives you is it starts with, well, it has a nuke, it has an army, it has a higher tech level. That's all okay. But you're mostly here for the fact that it starts with a space program and has a reasonable number of investment points while still being pretty cheap. So if you can get its unrest down, it starts at level 6 unrest. If you bring that unrest down, you'll get more IP. And I think Israel serves as a great mission control hub, plus gives you an extra nuke in your strategy if you need one. If it does get nuked, it is going to hurt the global economy because it has a core economic region. But again, it might be better than getting your main country nuked. But generally, I wouldn't use Israel like North Korea. I would lock it down because I don't want anyone else having this bomb. I would use it as an MC hub or a boost hub. because it starts with the space program already in place and it's relatively cheap. Another category of interesting minor nation would be spoils nations. So the characteristics of a good spoils nation are built around just using this priority here. This priority here is in many ways terrible. Spoils represents corruption, theft, and it does very, very well in countries with very limited levels of democracy and lots of resource nodes. So that basically means oil countries. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, these are all countries that are very cheap to maintain. Venezuela, for example, costs 10. Iraq costs 16. Again, pretty cheap. But these will generate something like 200 money every time you pump one IP into spoils, which means you can easily quadruple an early game money income or more by just taking over a country like this and running at 100% spoils. It's bad for the country, it's bad for global warming, it's not sustainable, you can't do it forever, but you can do it for a good number of years before the country is completely ruined. So if you need emergency amounts of money, or if you're just getting started, running spoils in an oil-rich or a resource-rich country, so countries with low democracy and lots of resource nodes for a couple of years, is a decent way to get a bunch of money. What makes a bad nation? Not in terms of moral judgment, but a bad nation in terms of things you... Actually, no, sorry, before I talk about that, other things that you can look for in good nations. Equatorial positioning. The closer you are to the equator, the better. Because investments in Boost get bonuses the closer you are to the equator. If you're watching my playthrough, you will have noticed that Exodus took over Lower Guinea, put in place a spaceflight program and boost there. That's because Lower Guinea is pretty well positioned on the equator for you to get bonus boost there. You do need to invest in a spaceflight program first, but countries like, for example, Indonesia, countries like Malaysia, Singapore, these are countries which can get a significant bonus to their investments in Boost and make a decent option. I'm also going to call out Australia for being 30 points, so reasonably cheap, and still giving decent research output while starting with pre-investment in an army. Like, Australia's okay. In terms of cost, it's like a mini Japan. It costs significantly less than Japan, but still produces a decent amount of research. If you're just looking for a small nation to tack on, 30-ish cost, Australia is an okay option. So equatorial position is good, oil resources for spoils is good, and potential to form large nations. So that's sort of its own topic, but if your country can get lots of claims on its neighbors and eventually become a superstate, that's also an advantage. What makes small nations also very powerful? If large nations benefit from investments in things like economy and welfare because they apply to the whole country and they're more efficient that way. Small countries are good at building things like mission control, things with a set cost. So nuclear weapons, if you have to build them in small nations. Mission control, if you have to build them in small nations. So something like Israel or Singapore, if Singapore started with a spaceflight program, it would be a great place to build mission control. And even if you have to invest in a spaceflight program first, still a country like Singapore may still be a good place to build a whole bunch of mission control. Just worth calling out there. Generally, you want a small but wealthy nation to build your MC in. You want big nations to build your research economies in. You get research from very large nations by getting very high education and democracy levels with big populations. You generate MC points, and to an extent things like boost and nukes, you generate those from small but wealthy nations. What makes for an unimpressive nation, or a nation I don't like? A nation which has a high cost coupled with pretty meh outputs. You'll find some of these around the place. These are not particularly good examples, but if a country has basically nothing going for it, then I wouldn't normally target it, especially if it's vulnerable to be turned over. Developing super underdeveloped countries takes a while unless you're planning to amalgamate them. So, for example, Central African Republic, if you took the Central African Republic, you're barely going to notice on your cap. It costs 2. It's going to give you 6.4 science. That's actually reasonable. but it's going to be a lot better once you glue it together with other countries in a larger union. But I don't want this to go too long, so let me just sort of try and summarize. Your opening strategy is either going to be to go for a superpower or to try and stitch together a couple major powers if you're power gaming. You don't have to power game. The game is forgiving enough on normal that you can pick basically whatever nations you want. You want to do a full Africa challenge playthrough, you can do a full Africa challenge playthrough. I might do it at some point. But generally speaking, you're going to open either targeting China, targeting the United States, or playing in Europe. If you're not playing in Europe, then you're probably grabbing some value countries like Japan, India, and building sort of a coalition, a Russia, and building a coalition of major powers. Keep in mind the special countries: Kazakhstan for its boost, North Korea for its emergency nuke, um, Israel for the fact it starts with a space program and a reasonable amount of IP, even more if you take down the unrest. And thus, Israel, I think, is a pretty good MC farm. Pick your opening strategy and stick to it. Doing two superpowers at once isn't really going to work for you. Grabbing a few CPs all over South America, but not really having a plan for it, not really the way to go. I wouldn't grab random countries. I'd go in with a purpose. You're going to grab a few specific states, and then over time you're going to expand, because you can always break into small countries later. It's always going to be easy to grab Iraq or Syria or whatnot later on in the game. It's not going to be easy to grab China or the United States. Once a faction is dug into a major power, like a united EU, like China, like the United States, they're hard to dig out. There are some specific mechanisms to do it that can be occasionally annoying, but generally speaking, it's hard to dig people out of major powers. So anyway, hopefully that gives you a little bit of direction. Either pick a superpower. The US is a safe option for being able to do everything at once. China is a nation with immense potential. Europe, likewise, but it takes a little bit of work in exchange for being like really quite good if managed correctly. Or stitch together a coalition out of major powers. Make sure you factor Kazakhstan into your strategy in some way, either taking it directly or grabbing it, Russia, and absorbing it. And otherwise, have fun. Have a purpose behind every nation that you get. Don't try and do the same priority list on every country. In the nicest possible way. It's not worth building a nuclear weapons program as Iraq if you have the United States. The US has all the nukes. You don't need to go building them as someone else. Only one country might need to invest in Miltech, China or the US. Everyone else can just rely on them for military strength. So by all means, specialize your countries, acquire each one with a plan as to how you're going to use them, and you'll find that you've put your secret Illuminati organization in the best possible position to deal with the alien invasion. In any case, hope that was somewhat useful. Next time I will talk about some early game technologies, or maybe I'll talk about space exploration, or both. We will see. I will shortly be resuming the HF playthrough. I just thought I'd get a few of these guides out first. If you are enjoying the game, I please encourage you to leave a Steam review. The developers are too nice to ever ask you to do it themselves, but it means everything to indie games in early access, especially in these early days. So if you're enjoying it, please go onto Steam and leave a thumbs up. Pleasure talking to you all. See you again soon.